we're staying very liquid because we think something is going to be available soon. We think the market is going to come back to the old market of debt and equity instead of debt, go to Wall Street, slice it up, leverage it up, more debt, and no equity, which is what's happened, and that's why these conduits are all getting bitten. They basically, Wall Street is unique the way they can handle, the way they can figure out to take demand for 3 and turn it into demand for 30. I mean, they're unbelievable the way they've done that, and that's basically what's happened. They've made borrowers out of people to buy, that could afford a $300,000 house. They figured out a way to get them to buy a $600,000 house because the volume goes up and they make more money, and basically it's gotten us in trouble. I think the investment world is going back to very simple, I hope, back to the old days of debt and equity, 75, 80% debt, 20, 30% equity. If that happens, that's coming back to our game, basically. So I'm preparing myself for that, and I hope it's going to happen.
Now, what's going on in the investment market? It's actually kind of a schism. It's just amazing to me that it's totally different. With everything crumbling around you in the real estate world, the investment real estate world is held up extremely well. And let me just show you some numbers that kind of verify that. If you look at this chart that I've showed, which is basically in Barron's, showing you what assets did what for the first 8 months of 2007. At the very bottom, it shows you real estate, and for a 5-year average over in the right-hand column, real estate has gone up. These are REITs, these are public real estates. The REITs have gone up 19.4% on average per year. It's the 3rd best performer behind technology and natural resources. So it's been a wonderful world to be in the REIT world for the past 5 years. As you can see, the last year to date, it's down 7.5%. And it's had a little bit of rally since then, but basically this year is going to come out about even. I'm relatively optimistic about certain REIT categories and certain REIT locations because the cost of reproducing the REIT inventory is much higher than the cost of the current inventory. And rents in certain areas are going up very rapidly. And New York, for example, I was talking to my friend who's the chairman of Renato today, and he told me they're getting $175 in rent. And he says their biggest mistake they made was renting the space too early and too cheap. But $175, that's up from like $110 last year at this time. So if I were looking for areas to invest in the REIT world, and I would on corrections, I think, and I'm going to show you in a minute why income properties work, but if I were looking to do that, I would look very carefully at port cities. I would look very carefully at areas that have constraints like Washington, D.C., New York. Miami, for example, is 82% built out, where Jacksonville is only 9% built out. I mean, they have 91% land remaining. In that kind of a market, you don't get a lot of appreciation. I love Jacksonville mainly because the port up there is about to get hot, and I think it's going to be a totally different city, so I don't mean to be picking on Jacksonville. But Miami, you're 82%, the land's built out 82%. So in that kind of constraints, you can get a lot of appreciation, just like Manhattan and Washington, D.C. and California and places like that. So if you're looking at REITs, I would look in areas that have constraints or port cities. Port cities, why port cities? I mean, everybody reads that the United States of America and every other country in the world is becoming more of a global enterprise than it used to be 10 years ago or 25 years ago, and certainly going to be more of a global enterprise 25 years from now than it is today, because the ability to move goods around the world is much easier today than it was before. But I don't know whether you read that article in the Wall Street Journal just a few days ago that basically said a boat down in Brazil waits out on shore almost 2 weeks before it gets to the dock. These things are somewhere between $180,000 and $600,000 a day you're renting these boats. You can imagine the pain of having your cargo on that boat and costing you $600,000 a day to get it to the shore. And that's the reason that the company from Korea and the company from China have signed up to take spaces at the port in Jacksonville. I think that's going to be a huge benefit for Jacksonville because you can get in and out of there until they fill it up. They can get in and out of there very rapidly, and it's going to make Jacksonville, I think, much more of an international city. They do have some land availability that obviously takes away from that a little bit, and that's what made Miami. And Miami, we're basically in the cargo warehouse related business, and what we look for are cities that have good airports and good port tie-in. and something that's 30 minutes apart from each other. Because any kind of cargo, if they have the combination, it's much better than not having the combination, for a simple reason that one guy doesn't want to ship for $2 a pound when he can ship for 80 cents a pound using a boat. He doesn't have the time constraints that the plane has. So having both combinations is really, and then Miami on top of that, having 232 million people down in South and Central America, growing at a 5 to 6% rate, and we're the first touch point to America. I think it has a gigantic advantage. Plus, we have a $15 billion infrastructure in our port. So I think we have a real advantage being in Miami, and I think that's one of the reasons that it's growing so much. I would look, if I were looking in that arena, I would look at REITs that have constraints. I would look at REITs that are in areas that have very tight constraints. The cost of construction is going through the roof. The cost of reproducing this stuff is going to be higher. So I still think there's a lot of opportunity. What would I look for back to the housing market for a moment as signals that the housing market might be coming to an end? I mean, I don't know that it's going to take the 4 or 5 years that I pointed here. I don't think it will. I think there'll be some solution before then, because these politicians can't stand pain. And this is pain. I mean, everybody, when they go home and everybody yells about being foreclosed, that's pain. They can't handle it. So they're going to do something, in my judgment. What I would look for residential public companies buying their stock back. That would be a signal to me that they think it's over. If you saw a quarter or two where they stopped taking write-offs, that would be a signal to me that it's about over. If you saw inter-acquisitions of one housing company buying another housing company, I think that would be a signal that it's about over. These markets all have a way of leading you out of the trouble. Those kind of signals will tell you that it's about over. We haven't seen those yet. I don't know whether these housing stocks are going through a dead cat bounce or whatever they're doing at the moment. But, you know, they go down and it seems like there's some short covering, goes up a little bit and then back down, but the trend seems to be lower. At some point, that's going to change. And to me, those would be the signals to watch for when it does change. What I have here is a financial analysis. I'm going to run through it fairly quickly, but I think it kind of tells you a great story about why you want to own income property. And let me preface this by saying, I've said to every one of my children, of which I have 5, and every one of my grandchildren, of which I have 11, figure out a way to buy yourself a 100,000 square foot building. Whatever you do, figure it out, syndicate it, do it. I don't care if you buy 10,000 foot buildings or 25,000 foot buildings, but figure out a way to buy 100,000 square feet of buildings that you're going to own until you retire, and I promise you're going to be a happy camper, because by the time you retire, you've paid the building off, but really what happens is the tenant paid the building off, and you'll have a building free and clear that will generate plenty of income for your retirement. I tell everybody I know that story, and I still believe to this day you should do that if you can possibly do that. And I'm going to kind of show you why you should do it. And you need to think long term. You know, one of the biggest problems that I have with the financial markets is they're basically looking for an exit strategy before they enter. And I think it's a jumping over dollars to get the pennies. I think the real successful investors think in generations. You look at the Warren Buffetts of the world and people like that, they're very peaceful with long-term investments. The average guy on Wall Street is peaceful for about 30 days. And then somebody's blowing in his ear, you got to get out, you got to get out, when are you going to get me out? Oh, it went up 13%, let me out of here, you know, that kind of behavior. But if you have a good investment, you ought to hold on to it. And I think one of the secrets to my success is I've always thought in generations, and I never really got hung up on the moment. I kind of got by the moment somehow and figured out to make my cash flow some way or another, and everybody has to do that. But I was always looking at the long term. So I think it's very valuable in real estate especially to think in generations. And the reason that real estate is a great deal is because you can there's 2 reasons. Income properties you can depreciate, which you can't do with stocks or bonds, and you also, the tenant pays the bills, which you can't do with stocks and bonds.